Why
such...
did you say you could speak the language?
I learned classical Spanish, not the strange dialect he seems to have picked up.
Be quicker to train a monkey. Morning, Miss Gatsby. Morning, Miss Tibbs.
Good morning, good morning.
Fawlty Towers shattered records and set the gold standard for comedy, famously being voted the greatest British sitcom in history. But even its legendary status couldn't save it from one explosive moment that suddenly made it too dangerous for modern TV. A single scene eventually pushed broadcasters to pull the plug, turning a record-breaking masterpiece into a cultural lightning rod. Can a joke be so controversial that it erases decades of success? Or was this removal a step too far? Stay tuned as we unwrap the scandal that silenced a giant. The Torquay Nightmare, the true story that inspired John Cleese. Fawlty Towers aired in an era when everyone crowded around the living room TV, and it truly did wonders. Families would gather every week, absolutely buzzing to see what kind of wild, disastrous adventure each new episode would bring to life. But for all the laughs and the legendary status, there was one explosive, controversial scene that eventually caused network producers to axe the show. Now, this British sitcom actually only aired for a total of 12 episodes across 2 short seasons in 1975 and 1979 on the BBC. Even though it was short-lived, it has gathered massive critical acclaim over the years and is widely considered to be one of the best-written comedies ever produced. The magic behind the madness came from the minds of American actress Connie Booth and British comic legend John Cleese. Cleese was already a huge star from the iconic sketch show Monty Python's Flying Circus, and he brought that same sharp energy to this project. He and Booth had married back in 1968 and had a daughter named Cynthia, who later followed in her dad's footsteps by acting in hits like A Fish Called Wanda. However, the pressure of the show, or perhaps life itself, took its toll, and the couple actually divorced in 1978, right before the second season even hit the airwaves. The show itself is set in a fictional, slightly run-down hotel on the English coast. It's run by the most clumsy and incredibly rude host you've ever seen, Basil Fawlty. Alongside him is his wife Sybil, who is much sharper than she lets on, and the hotel's hard-working waitress Polly, played by Booth. Then, of course, there's the kind but constantly confused Spanish waiter, Manuel. Most of the humor comes from Basil's total failure to make his hotel high-class and the nasty insults he throws at his guests, especially the upper-class ones he's actually trying to impress. Believe it or not, the idea for this chaotic show came from a real-life nightmare. While staying at a hotel in Torquay with the Monty Python crew, Cleese met the owner, Donald Sinclair. Cleese later called him the rudest man he had ever met in his entire life. Sinclair apparently treated his guests like they were a total nuisance just for staying there. Cleese based Basil directly on this guy, copying everything from the way he'd comment on how guests ate to the way he'd completely ignore people standing right at the front desk waiting for help. This led to some of the most famous plotlines in TV history, usually involving things spiraling out of control due to simple miscommunications. Take the episode The Germans from the first season. Basil is trying to run a fire drill, loses his cool, and ends up insulting a group of German guests by constantly bringing up World War II. Whether a guest asks for something simple or something strange, it usually sets off Basil's temper and ends in a total disaster. Manuel and Polly always get dragged into his mess, while Basil tries to hide his failing schemes from Sybil, who usually prefers gossiping on the phone to actually helping. While the show is a masterpiece, it hasn't escaped criticism. Many point out the ethnic stereotyping in how Basil treats Manuel, often mocking his accent or his struggle with English. And then there's the marriage between Basil and Sybil, which is pretty much a war zone. Basil calls her "my little piranha fish" and other mean names, yet he's clearly terrified of her and cowers whenever she makes a demand. Polly is usually the only sane person in the building, frequently bailing Basil out of trouble, like the time he forgot their anniversary and had to convince her to dress up as a sick Sybil, just to trick his party guests. Even with all that drama behind the scenes and the controversial humor, the show's legacy is untouchable. In the year 2000, it was officially named the greatest British television program of all time. But as we've seen, the road to that #1 spot was paved with scandals and one specific scene that modern networks just couldn't handle, leading to the moment that changed the show's history forever. While Basil's insults were scripted, the real-life suffering of the man on the receiving end of those jokes was very real, leading us into why playing Manuel was a real-life nightmare for Andrew Sachs. Why playing Manuel was a real-life nightmare for Andrew Sachs. Even though Manuel was the butt of every single joke on the show, there were things he had to endure behind the scenes that most fans never even knew about. From actual physical burns to painful hits on the head, the man behind the character, Andrew Sachs, went through a lot of real-life pain just to give us those classic laughs. His long and varied career was truly defined by Fawlty Towers, and his performance as the well-meaning but totally helpless Spanish waiter was easily one of the biggest highlights of the entire series. He played a character who lived in a state of constant confusion with a shaky grasp of English, which made him the perfect target for Basil Fawlty's legendary rages. But before he was Manuel, Andrew Sachs was working hard to make a name for himself. He made his film debut back in the 1959 comedy The Night They Dropped a Clanger, starring alongside Brian Rix and William Hartnell, who would later become the very first Doctor Who. He followed that up with a small part in another film called Nothing Barred. But even with a steady stream of jobs, his profile stayed pretty low. He popped up in a 1962 BBC drama and had minor appearances in a few 60s TV shows like The Saint, just waiting for that big break that would change everything. Interestingly, he even appeared in a 1973 film called Hitler, The Last 10 Days, which starred Alec Guinness as the dictator hiding out in his bunker. Sachs definitely didn't miss the irony of being a half-Jewish actor playing Walter Wagner, the Nazi lawyer who actually married Hitler to Eva Braun right before they committed suicide. Eventually, Sachs crossed paths with John Cleese while they were both working on some boring training films. When Cleese finally convinced the BBC to make Fawlty Towers, and believe it or not, the network bosses were actually really skeptical about it. At first, Sachs landed the role that launched him right into the public eye. However, playing Manuel wasn't an easy gig by any means. He actually got hurt twice on set while filming. Once, Basil attacked him with a real metal saucepan because the producer overruled Cleese's wish to use a rubber one. Then, during the famous kitchen fire scene in the episode The Germans, things took a dangerous turn. A chemical on his clothes that was supposed to look like smoke turned out to be corrosive, and it actually ate right into his skin, causing real injuries. Much of the comedy we love today revolves around Manuel's hilariously bad English. Remember him saying, "I learn it from a book?" That language barrier made it impossible for him to understand even the simplest instructions, leading to the chaos we all remember. It's wild to think that behind those iconic "quay" moments was an actor who was literally suffering for his art, making sure the show stayed as one of the greatest masterpieces in TV history. But Manuel wasn't the only part of the show that faced an uphill battle, because the network itself almost killed the project before it even started. Why the BBC thought Basil Fawlty was too boring for TV. You might think you know everything there is to know about the hotel from hell, but there are so many secrets buried behind those check-in desks that never made it to the screen. While it might look like Fawlty Towers was an instant hit the moment it landed on our screens, that actually wasn't the case at all. In fact, back at the start, the big bosses at the BBC thought the whole idea for the show was totally old-fashioned and boring. They looked at characters like the manic Basil Fawlty, his bossy wife Sybil, the confused Spanish waiter Manuel, and the smart maid Polly, and they just saw a bunch of tired cliches. John Cleese even remembers producers sarcastically whispering about the script in the BBC bar, calling it a total disaster. One script editor even wrote a memo saying the show was dire and that he couldn't see it being anything but a massive flop. Thankfully, the BBC didn't listen to that advice, and they went ahead and filmed a pilot starring a 35-year-old Cleese in late 1974. Even though the show is supposed to be set in the seaside town of Torquay, most of the filming actually happened in suburban spots like Harrow and Wembley. If you remember that famous scene where Basil goes absolutely crazy and starts thwacking his car with a tree branch, that was just a regular street in London. Even the building used for the hotel exterior wasn't a hotel at all. It was a golf club in Buckinghamshire called the Woburn Grange Country Club. Sadly, you can't visit it today because it burnt down in 1991 and was knocked down shortly after. When the very first episode finally aired in 1975, the reviews weren't exactly kind either. One newspaper even ran a headline saying, "Long John short on jokes," which is wild to think about now. But slowly, the audience started to grow as the BBC ran repeats, and by the time the second season came around 4 years later, expectations were through the roof. Because there was such a long gap between the seasons, which was actually long enough for Cleese and Booth to get divorced, people started remembering the show as being even better than it actually was. This huge hype even led to a legend about a missing 13th episode that supposedly exists somewhere in a vault. A Swedish author once claimed he had actually seen this lost episode and even wrote about it in his book. But most people think he was just dreaming. The BBC archives have absolutely no record of it, and it's likely that the rumor started because of a simple numbering error at the studio when filming was delayed by a strike. The truth is that only 12 episodes were ever made, mostly because they were so incredibly hard to write. Cleese and Booth would spend over 2 weeks just working out the plot before they even wrote a single line of dialogue. Their scripts were twice as long as normal shows because they were packed with detailed instructions on all the crazy physical comedy and fast-paced action. They made a specific choice to perform everything at lightning speed, with twice as many camera cuts as a normal sitcom to keep the energy high for people watching at home. This unique magic is exactly why every single attempt to remake the show has failed miserably. People have tried to recreate it all over the world, especially in the US, where they even tried a version without Basil Fawlty, which is just impossible to imagine. There was even a plan for a movie where Basil and Sybil traveled to Barcelona to meet Manuel's family and end up stopping a plane hijacking. But Cleese decided not to make it. He knew the fans' expectations were so high that no movie could ever live up to the legend of those original 12 episodes. While the movie never made it to the screen, one specific episode did, and it caused a storm that hasn't settled to this day. Don't mention the war, the most controversial 30 minutes in TV history. Many people truly believed that one specific episode was the final nail in the coffin that took Fawlty Towers off the air forever. But that actually wasn't the case at all. While the episode The Germans is definitely the most controversial half-hour in the show's history, it didn't end the series. It just became a massive cultural lightning rod decades later. In 2020, during a global conversation about race, the streaming platform UKTV actually pulled the episode from its library, sparking a huge debate. People were outraged by the inclusion of some really outdated and offensive racial slurs used by the character Major Gowan. On top of that, Basil Fawlty's chaotic and offensive impression of Adolf Hitler, complete with goose-stepping and shouting, was seen by some as a step too far for modern television. The story of this infamous episode starts with Sybil being stuck in the hospital for a few days to deal with an ingrowing toenail. This leaves Basil in charge of the hotel alone, and Sybil keeps calling him with a never-ending list of chores, like hanging a moose head and running a mandatory fire drill. While trying to get things organized, Basil has a chat with the elderly and senile Major Gowan. The Major starts cringing at the idea of German guests arriving the next day and launches into a rant using racial slurs that are incredibly shocking to hear today. It's a scene that was meant to mock the Major's backwards views, but in the modern world, it's exactly what led to the episode being temporarily banned before it was eventually put back with content warnings. As Basil tries to manage the hotel, things quickly spiral into a total mess. While he's trying to hang that moose head with Manuel, he keeps getting interrupted by Sybil's nagging phone calls. At one point, Manuel is practicing his English behind the reception desk while the moose head is sitting there, which actually convinces the confused Major that the moose is talking. The next morning, the real chaos begins during the fire drill. Basil gets the burglar alarm and the fire alarm mixed up, leaving the guests totally confused. To make matters worse, Manuel accidentally starts a real fire in the kitchen. When Basil tries to put it out, the fire extinguisher explodes in his face, blinding him, and Manuel accidentally knocks him out cold with a frying pan. Basil wakes up in the hospital with a concussion, but he's so obsessed with the hotel that he sneaks out and heads back just in time to meet the German guests. This is where the most famous scenes happen. Because of his head injury and his own hidden prejudices, Basil becomes obsessed with not mentioning the war, but he literally cannot stop talking about it. He starts bringing up everything from the RAF firebombing raids to Nazi leaders like Göring and Goebbels. It gets so bad that one of the German guests actually bursts into tears while Basil continues to argue with them. The madness reaches its peak when Basil goes into full Hitler mode, doing a goose-stepping march right in front of the horrified guests. Just as the hospital doctor arrives to sedate him, Basil tries to run away but smashes right into the wall. The moose head falls off, knocks Basil out again, and lands right on Manuel's head. As the Major walks back in and starts talking to the moose head again, the stunned German guests can only watch in total disbelief. One of them finally asks the question everyone was thinking: how ever did they win? It was a wild, messy conclusion to an episode that remains one of the most popular, yet most criticized moments in British TV history. But while that episode left everyone in shock, it didn't actually kill the series. So what actually killed the series? Stick around to find out. Lightning in a bottle. Why no one can replicate the Fawlty magic. You might have heard the rumors that a single explosive scene was so dangerous that it actually forced the network to pull the plug and axe the show for good. But the real story is even juicier than the scandal itself. While many people believe that the controversial episode The Germans, with its shocking racial slurs, and Basil's infamous Hitler impression was the reason the show vanished, that's actually a bit of a TV myth. The truth is, after the second series became a global phenomenon, the BBC was practically begging for more. They even offered John and Connie a massive mountain of cash to come back for a third season. But the creative spark between the two had simply died out. The real reason the show ended wasn't because of a ban or a boycott. It was because John and Connie couldn't find a way to work together anymore after their divorce. Beyond the personal drama, they both felt like they had accomplished everything they possibly could with those characters. They didn't want to drag the show on until it got boring, so they made the tough call to walk away while they were still at the top. This decision to keep the series short is exactly why it's still called the gold standard of comedy today, even if some of those scenes eventually turned the masterpiece into a cultural lightning rod decades later. It's probably a good thing they stopped when they did, because every attempt to remake the show since then has failed miserably. People have tried to adapt it for American audiences at least 3 times, but they all flopped because no one could ever replace the incredible chemistry of the original cast. These remakes felt lazy and just didn't have that same lightning-in-a-bottle energy. Even though the original show was an inspiration for almost every sitcom we love today, nobody could quite capture the magic of Basil, Sybil, Manuel, and Polly like the original team did. There was actually a moment in the 90s when a feature-length movie was on the table, and the plot sounded absolutely wild. Basil was finally going to travel to Spain to meet Manuel's family, but after a 14-hour delay at the airport, the plane gets hijacked. In true Basil fashion, he gets so annoyed by the inconvenience that he actually overpowers the terrorist himself. But then, when the pilot tries to turn the plane around, Basil gets so fed up that he forces them to fly to Spain at gunpoint anyway. He ends up spending his entire vacation in a Spanish jail and only gets out just in time to fly back home. In the end, John Cleese decided not to make the movie, because he knew that trying to keep that high-energy comedy going for 90 minutes was just too hard. He didn't want to give the fans something that couldn't match their massive expectations. So, even though we'll never get more episodes or a big-screen adventure, we still have those 12 legendary stories that never fail to make us laugh. The scandal might have sparked some heated debates, but the legacy of Fawlty Towers is untouchable. It's a record-breaking masterpiece that proved that sometimes the best way to become a legend is to leave the audience wanting more. What Fawlty Towers episode is your favorite till today? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.